Hello and welcome to NARC Live on Wednesday the 19th of January 2022. Coming to you live from Norfolk on the east coast of England with Tammy M0TC.
Hello.
And me, David G70RP. Good to see you. On tonight's show, antenna matching and ATUs. You can join us live on Zoom to share your experience. If you haven't got that Zoom link, which has been on here all the time, you can get it most easily probably by clicking on the link on the story on either your newsletter this week or on the norfolkamateurradio.org website. Just click on the link and you can join us. Can you work the world on a couple of 50p 555 chips? And we find out what on earth this is. But we start with some very sad news just brought to me within the last hour. I'm sad to bring you news that one of our members who've been a member of NARC for a very long time, Peter Woods, G0PJI, passed away earlier today. We don't have many details except that we knew he wasn't well because one of his friends in the club asked us to send a card about 10 days ago, which we did. But he lived in Heatherset. Most frequently attended the club really probably 10 plus years ago. Very regular visitor with his good friend Chris G for ILR when we met at the airport. But Peter, G0PJI, our thoughts are with you as friends and of course with his family at this sad time. Thanks to Tony G0MQG for calling me about 35 minutes ago or so. We managed to find this picture from a radioactive about 10 years ago. Now, a few weeks ago, we brought you the good news about how much money the club had raised for its nominated charity in 2021. That was East Anglian Children's Homes, Hospice, and we sent them the money there and then, and we just have this letter now, which I think we can just show you. I think you won't want to read every word of that, but it's very nice that they've sent a letter there. It was £1,284.82. Much of that was raised at the Barford event that we ran, where we asked for donations there, but other events as well, and some private fundraising, and we sold some cameras, if you remember, as well, some little video cameras, and we made quite a good profit on those, and all of that went to this fund. So again, if you missed that one, the NARC Live where we announced that at the end of the year, this is the good news, and each now have that money. Next, we've had an email from Rodney, G0CBO. It says, somebody sent this to me. It's a picture that appeared in the local paper when I lived in Margate in Kent. It was about 1982 when Rod was first licensed, and he's the one in the striped shirt in the back row, not the striped shirt as it's written here. About 32 years old he was then. We've put a round ring around him, a bit like they do on Crime Watch and things, but I assure you he's not wanted, as far as I know, for any crimes whatsoever. How time flies. And he says you may be able to make a few people smile on Wednesday evening. I love particularly about that, the clock. It was one of those clocks, the earliest digital clocks, with the flip over numbers, wasn't it? Very clear in those days, pre-LED. There we are, that's some kind of contest or something like that. What does it say there?
It says Bags operate the rig for the Radio Club of Thanet at the tournament on Sunday.
So I guess some kind of contest thing. 1982. Thank you for sharing that with us, Rodney. And next we heard from Tom, G8XQD. And he says, remember those old movies where some rather clever chap saves the day by making a transmitter from a matchbox and some old light bulbs? Although I've given up on my abilities using Morse, this intrigued me. So here is a workable top band and 80 meter idea using a couple of 555 timers or a 556 on its own would do the trick, which is a dual 555 with a few added components. The brown ferrite ring looks rather like the iron ore ones used in the mains filters to me. Isn't that intriguing? I mean, a 555, I guess if you're really a lot younger and you now develop things, you won't even maybe know what a 555 was. It's a CMOS sort of very basic timer, but it revolutionised timing in the early days. Lots of circuitry, after all, needs a good timer, and this would, from memory, would go from anything from a few milliseconds to seconds, all in one little chip, about 50 pence. I certainly remember it in my hobby days in the 70s and things like that. But it's fantastic to think that you could somehow transmit with them. I wouldn't have thought they would have resonated or oscillated at those sort of frequencies. But anyway, there's a circuit there. Now, if you want details of that, it is on hackaday.com. But if you want the exact link, rather than put it on the screen there, just drop me an email, radio@dcpmicro.com, and I'll copy the link that Tom sent to us with that on. But it's a lovely little story about how you can make something. Look at that, an 80-metre transmitter.
Is it going to save the day?
I don't know, maybe it is. Maybe it is. Now, one other thing, while we talk about making stuff, I've had a few queries since we bought that mass buying of bits to make the filter from Ian, GM3SEK, before Christmas. Some people missed the offer. I'm afraid it is over. We didn't buy for stock or anything because we couldn't. There was so much, it's thousands of pounds. But I've had a few people ask they would still like to make one, even though it's going to cost a little bit more. So I've put together a buying list that is between the places that Ian suggested, but all of his recommended parts, and the places that I bought from, which are accessible easily to amateurs, including the all-important ferrites, which are quite relatively difficult to get hold of from some firms like Farnell in the UK haven't got them, but a company called Mauser has them, and if you spend over a certain amount, which you can if you buy enough of the bits, then you'll get carriage free. So anyway, I've explained it all in a new little article that I put on the website a couple of days ago. It'll be there. I may put it on the newsletter this week as well if there's space. So if you missed out on that offer, or if you want the odd extra bits and pieces, if you want another case or you want some more wire or anything like that, I've put on there where I bought everything from, and you'll be able to click on the links and purchase extra bits and pieces, or indeed a complete kit for the filter, the mains filter. Now, the other thing is that you probably know that tonight was meant to be another talk by Kevin N4XL, in Excel in the States. And we had to change it very quickly because unfortunately the weather is not good where he is, and he lost power up until, when he wrote to me. So it didn't seem sensible to try and risk it. Now he hopes to be back and be able to do that talk next week, which is on ferrites and balance. However, it got me thinking that if he can't do that, we could, Mark G0LGJ actually suggested that we could do a night a bit like this, an informal night, talking about filters, because I know for at least two or three of you have written and said how you've made them and how good they are, and little hints and tips. So, a bit vague this, I know, but it's either going to be next Wednesday or the Wednesday after. We will do a talk, an informal like this, but all about that filter. For those of you, the 42 of you who ordered those kits, or any other, if you've built any other types of mains type filters in your time and you want to share that with us, we'll have another night like this. That also gives me the flexibility, and Kevin as well, our guest, to make sure that he's fully up and running with power and everything else to be able to give his talk. So either next week or the week after, we'll be doing a talk on an informal sort of social like this on those filters. And or Kevin will be doing hopefully his talk on ferrites and balance the other week. I hope that makes sense. Sounded like a lot of words to me.
It does.
But that's what we intend to do.
2 talks, 2 weeks. It could be either way round.
It's going to be either way round.
Yeah.
But in other words, if you've made your filter, especially, and if you've got any experience in that sort of thing, get some photos of it, and we'll be asking you to come on here in the next couple of weeks to do it. Now, I've got a thing here on the script here that says Kevin birthday.
Yeah, well, I thought we would just embarrass Kevin a little bit because he's
old.
Getting on a bit tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yep. Kevin M0UJD, Tammy's brother, my mate, and brother-in-law, is 40 tomorrow. And we kind of did a bit of a surprise party on Saturday night for him. A very surprise party.
We did, hence why he's already had his cake.
Yeah, a rather clever cake anyway.
Yeah.
We thought you'd love to see this little picture of him. There were worse.
There were worse,
But
yeah.
we thought we might
there
get
was
taken
some
off
with
the
me
air.
in as well, so they were the worst ones.
And there was some that I think we might get taken off the air with he
Yeah.
wasn't fully clothed, shall we say. He was a little bit younger than that. So we cut those out and put that on. But happy birthday for tomorrow, Kevin. 40. Doesn't look 40, does he? I looked 40 when I was about 10, I think. Anyway, never mind. Tammy. Oh, yes, before we do that, just to mention as well, membership. It is due now for NARC. It's £5, the online membership. If you haven't already joined, full details are on the norfolkamateurradio.org website. There we are. So please pay, and make sure you send an email as well and use your call sign as the reference for the payment, and send an email to the membership secretary. All the details are on the website. Little People, Tammy, I haven't seen it at all this week.
Little People, it's a little bit ferocious this week.
Really? It's not like you.
This is called, oh, do you know, I've forgotten what it was called now. It was called Danger Vault.
Right.
It's a saw.
It's a fret saw, isn't it? Is that what we call a fret saw?
Did they call them fret saws? Or is it like a little
Well, actually, it might be an
jewellery
abrophile
saw
type thing, which will saw in multiple directions. Brilliant thing.
I think it's just
It is
one of
a
those
bit.
sort of real thin ones.
Tell you what, I bet that athlete misses, make sure he clears the blade.
Yeah, exactly.
Or she. My goodness me. Very nice. That's the Little People, Tammy's Little People, that comes from miniature-calendar.com, where there's a new picture every day. And Tammy picks one out for us. Great stuff. So what have you been doing? Apart from Tom and Rodney, really, we didn't have any details from you this week. Any news or stories or pictures or anything? We'd love to hear from you. Drop them to this usual address, radio@dcpmicro.com. The address is at the bottom of your screen now, and if we can get that by 3 o'clock on Wednesdays, we'll usually include it on that show or the one straight afterwards. Thank you. So, it's round to that competition time. We run it every week, puzzling you sometimes you know, where we ask a question. And this week we asked, what on earth is this? And we had quite a few answers, solutions, guesses, or not. Do you want to start, Tammy?
Yep, so Simon M0SIH, the item shown on What on Earth Is This is a Venetian blind slat cutter, which is used to cut Venetian blinds to the required size.
Okay. Bruce G4KZT says, back in the 80s, there was a game show on BBC One called Face the Music. Joseph Cooper, who was the compere, had a dummy keyboard on which he would play a piece of music, but no notes could be heard. The contestants had to guess what the piece of music was just by watching him and hearing the clacking sound as he struck the keys. What's this got to do with this, you ask? Well, he says, Bruce says, I wonder if this week's What on Earth is a dummy Morse key, perhaps, for practicing CW without annoying the rest of the household. Annoying. Oh dear. If not, it looks a bit like a device that my father had for cutting and splicing 8mm home movie film. Remember those? Yeah, I remember 8mm movie films.
Kevin M0UJD said it's a blind cutter.
Victor G3JNB said, I think it's a pocket version of a company seal. Yeah, I could get that.
What's a company seal?
Seal? We don't remember that? Well, I think they're still used. When you used to have official documents.
Like an embosser type
Like
thing?
an embosser, yeah.
Oh,
It would
okay.
either emboss, or in the early days it was a piece of wax and things. But
Right.
and you would emboss the piece of wax to show that it was something unique. Somewhere, because our company's a limited company, and we had an official seal.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't know. Heaven knows where that is now.
Oh, your task for next week then is to find it.
Over 40 years ago, but you used occasionally on an official document for HMRC or someone like that. You would get the punch and you would have to emboss it with a company seal.
Cool. There you go.
Mm-hmm.
Colin M0GMK. This week's object is a Venetian blind slat cutter.
And James M0JGX says, I think that what on earth this week is a Venetian blind trimmer. But, he says, I'll come clean. I didn't know until today when I had to check the power in a home furnishing workshop and asked Malcolm, the owner, what it was. And he told him. And he says, P.S. His workshop has lots of sewing machines, including some big industrial ones. Come back, sewing machines.
Sewing machines. John G8CHP, this week's object is a mousetrap for a computer mouse. The cup is loaded with tasty bites, and being a humane device, the mouse is trapped by its lead until it can be safely released into someone else's shack. Does not work on cordless mice.
I see what you mean there. It does. Yeah. Ken, GM4JMU, says the current object is, I believe, a small guillotine for cutting Venetian blind blades to length. For DIY blind assembly, the blades might require some trimming to fit. This device has a device arm that allows the same length to be trimmed on each blade set. By the way, this is from Ken again. I was impressed by the answers to my water meter, which was, of course, last week's What on Earth object. In fact, I learned a bit more about it, the origin and the inventor. Maybe it reflects the demographics of the club, because he remembers it from the 60s but bought his about 10 years ago. Anyway, it's about time we revealed exactly what it is. And it is, Tammy?
Well, before you say that, I was just thinking, I didn't know what it was, but if you take the piece off and just look at the picture on the right, it could actually be like a capo. Do you know what a capo is?
No.
That you put around a guitar, couldn't it?
Oh, the thing that you move up and down the strings.
Yeah.
What's that? Yeah.
It's look a little bit like that.
I could see
anyway.
someone on the Zoom call at home who'd know what that is.
Yeah, oh, Steve's showing one.
Yeah, oh yes.
It's a bit thicker than the one there, though.
I think this one would cut it off, though, possibly, because it is indeed...
It is a Venetian blind slack
cutter. So Richard G0JAG sent us that. And I think it's one of those objects, you know, I did know what it was because I've used one. When we put Venetian blinds all around here, I used something very similar to that. But I think it's one of those things, if you haven't seen it, you don't know. But you see that curved bit, that blade there, that's what gives it that nice finish, rounded finish on each slat. Takes absolutely ages to do lots of Venetian blinds, but a lovely, useful gadget.
Yeah.
So how did you do at home? Did you know what that was? Well, how about this? Now, this is an interesting one. Have a good look at this, because we're saying for this week's competition, what on earth is this? I'll admit, I had no idea. Do you? I hope we're not giving too many clues away, because
I've just seen there's some text on the bottom there, but I don't know.
Have a look at it and see if you can fathom what that is. It may or may not be radio related. It may be a tool, maybe a gadget, maybe a Witsit, watch it, whatever. But you have got until 3 o'clock next Wednesday to work out what that is. As always, this picture will be in our newsletter and on our website and on the Facebook page. And you've got till, say, 3 o'clock next Wednesday to let us know. radio@dcpmicro.com. Tell us what you think that is. Thanks very much for sending us that. Now, just to tell you what's happening next week at NARC on Sunday, we've got the GB2RS news on GB3MB repeater, as always, at 7 p.m. On Monday, we've got the Monday Night Net, this week with host Michael 2E0SZP at 7:30, and at 8:30, we've got the 80-metre CW net on 3.543 megahertz. Next Wednesday, the 26th of January, hopefully, we will have Kevin N4XL giving his talk on ferrites and balance. But if that doesn't happen, we'll let you certainly know early in the week. And then it will be a talk about, it'll be an interactive about the filter kits that so many of you, 42 of you, bought. And we'd love your feedback. Maybe you can show us how you built them. Maybe you've adapted them, modified them, or whatever. And if it isn't next week that you do that, we will definitely do it the week after. So there's your next 2 weeks on NARC Live covered. It will be one or the other, and hopefully we'll swap them around if we need to. But hopefully a talk by Kevin next week on ferrites and balance. And also don't forget to please let us know of your stories and your pictures and your news and everything. We really do love to hear it. It makes our news at the beginning of the programme. And of course, we're also always happy to send one of these cards. Sadly, this is a card that we sent to Peter a couple of weeks ago, and we send 1 or 2 every week. And we're very happy to send it to anybody that you know who might be cheered by it. Just let us know, radio@dcpmicro.com. Wherever they are in the world, we're happy to send one of these cards. Celebration, birthday, not feeling so good, whatever reason, we're very happy to send a card on behalf of you and the club to whoever you'd like us to. Now we come round to our main event this evening, and it is an interactive evening. I can see we've got at the moment, 12 people online at home. So let's have a look at those, can we, Tammy, at the moment?
We can.
Oh, a motley crew they are. There we go. Hello, guys. Oh, we've got 13 now.
I think there's actually a couple there who haven't got their videos on as well.
Okay,
so,
well, it's really good to see you. This is an interactive. So we're looking for some feedback. We have got a few pictures as well that people have sent us ahead, which we'll be happy to show you. But I think first, probably everybody there has got something to say about antenna matching and ATUs. Now, I deliberately worded it like this because I think, like others, I went on the Monday Night Net briefly, and someone there said their trainers said the same thing. ATUs, antenna tuning units, is a very misleading term because it makes it sound like a piece of magic that will completely tune any aerial to any radio, whereas actually it's always a compromise, or pretty much always a compromise. I know some experts there who know more than me and will confirm that, I think. But ideally what you'll do is always make your antennas resonant with your radio. But we're not living in an ideal world, and you need to match the two. So antenna matching units, I know, is what our training team prefers to call those units that do that. But whether you do it like that or whether you make your antennas specifically to tune to the channel, this is what tonight's all about. We're calling this series In the Shack, and roughly once a month we want to do an interactive like that to examine a particular bit of the Radio Shack. And it's not just for experts, it's not just for experienced amateurs, it's for beginners. In fact, especially for beginners, where we can share and help you with the things. You learn some basics in the courses, but you don't really know about the real practical aspects of various aspects of the Shack, and that's what In the Shack is all about. And tonight, as I said, it's all about antenna matching and ATUs. So let's kick it off and start with Bob, G6PWS. Good evening to you, Bob. If you can unmute.
Yeah, good evening, sir.
Good to see you. Good to see you. We're fine.
Yeah,
so
good,
what's
good,
your
good.
experience of antenna matching or ATUs?
Mainly done through the radios that I've had, but I have got an MFJ unit. Can't remember where it is. It's behind me somewhere. I can't reach over there because I have earphones on tonight. But yes, I found it very, very good when I had the 991A tuning up a long wire. But now I've got this 1000, FT1000. It seems to tune onto my aerial fine. But I've still got it, and I shall probably be using it. I've got an 891, which I want to put together, and I have got a long wire, which I want to put up. But that's summer days. Oh, but my wife won't let me go up the ladder in this weather. I don't know why.
I think that's very wise.
You never know. Yeah.
Okay,
Bob.
I've got to do. I mean, what's your experience of them? I mean, are they all pretty effective?
Yes. I've got two actually, a smaller one and a bigger. And I can't remember the numbers, but I've got two of them. One of them works a lot better than the other. But one of them is very tight as you're adjusting it. It's so tight in the adjustment, if you know what I mean. And if you tune up or down the band too far, then you just lose it. So you've got to start again. But no, apart from that, I find they work fine. No problems at all, especially on the long wire.
Okay, good. All right. Well, thanks for that. You might have heard some noise in the background. I apologise for that. But literally minutes before we came on air, I rushed home to get an ATU in case we didn't have anybody with actually one that we could show. So at some point in the evening, I'll show you. I've just undone the screws of it. I love undoing things and taking them to bits anyway, don't I? And we'll show you inside that. But let's go around to somebody else now, talk about their experience with antenna matching and ATUs, and that's Malcolm, G3PDH. Good evening, Malcolm. We'll need to unmute Malcolm, sorry. That's something we can't do remotely.
Yeah, okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, fine, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Sorry about that. Yes, okay. Well, good evening to you and also to everybody on channel and on the broadcast as well. Yeah, I did make a listing. I don't know if you received it or not.
I did, and I've got that in front of me.
Yeah, just some ideas of topics, really.
Yes.
I think you've kind of said the most important thing, which an ATU doesn't actually tune the antenna. All that it does is really make the transmitter think that it's looking at a resonant antenna. So the antenna will still be as much of a compromise as it was in the first place, really. And ATUs will take some of the power as well. So in really, I think what I wanted to mainly get over was the fact that, as you already mentioned, it's better to have your antenna resonant if you can, and avoid using an ATU at all if you can get away with that. But of course, with lots of modern gardens and small plots and things, people probably are trying to match into long wires or short wires, and for that they are going to need an ATU. But there are really quite a lot of facts around ATUs, which I did kind of list on the listing I sent through.
Would you like me to read those, Malcolm, or have you got them in front of you?
It was just really to try and give a format to work against that would probably follow through in some logical fashion, like internal ATUs and external ones, and whether you're trying to match into a high impedance or just the standard 50 ohm, which most of them do, particularly the ones which are built into rigs. So all these things are going to affect what you do with an ATU, what kind of an ATU you have, and also the power level that you're going to run. The other thing I'll just say as well before you refer to the list is another particularly important point is if you have an external ATU and you have an SWR meter, that SWR meter has to go between the rig and the ATU. I have seen lots of cases where people have put the SWR meter on the antenna side of the ATU and can't understand why the reading's not making any sense. So those are particularly,
because of course, so for those beginners who might be watching this, of course, the problem with that is it's not actually showing you if the antenna or the whole lot is being matched to your radio, which is the whole point of it, isn't it? If you put it in the wrong place.
It's really matching your 50 ohm output on your radio into 50 ohms, which is being created by the ATU rather than the antenna. So the power transfer will be there, but the antenna will still have whatever compromised characteristics it had. That's why it's better to go into a resonant antenna if you can. So anyway, I'm sure other people have got lots of other points, but if you wanted to use that list as a kind of basis for discussion, then go ahead.
Yeah, well, we can certainly make sure we cover everything. I think that's the that's the important thing, Malcolm. Yeah, it's really good. It does break it all down. Okay, well, thank you for that for the moment. As always, we can come back to you and other people as well. I mean, I shan't just keep going just through a list and then go. I will go to the next person on the list now because I think we'll all agree that he's pretty much our antenna expert in the club. Sorry, Steve, more pressure on you. So good evening to you, Steve.
Hi, how are you?
KYA. I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine. I think I agree with everything that Malcolm said. I generally don't. I do have an ATU, but I generally don't use it now because the antenna I've got is resonant on many bands. But I've used them over the years, and they're essential. I think certain antennas do definitely need an ATU, such as a doublet. If you have a doublet, an open wire feeder, you've got to have an ATU with it. The chances of getting a 50 ohm impedance out of one of those is pretty slim. What I would say about internal ATUs is that generally Yaesu ones work up to about 3:1 SWR. So if you've got an antenna that's more than 3:1 without an ATU, then you're okay up to 3:1. But anything more than that, the chances are the ATU won't match it. Icon ones tend to go a little bit higher, I think more like 5 or 6:1. But other than that, you've then got to go to an external ATU. So internal ATUs are fine, but only for kind of just tweaking, really. If you're using an antenna that's tuned for the CWN and you're now up the upper end of sideband, then yes, an internal ATU might sort it, but very, very limited in terms of what you can do with them. And I see a lot of people say, oh, my internal ATU doesn't work. It can't match the antenna. Well, then I would say have a look at your antenna, because that's probably the reason why. I suppose on top of that, you've then got not so much ATUs, but impedance transformers you can use. Go back to the end-fed half wave that we've discussed over and over again. They have an impedance of about 2,500 ohms, and an internal ATU certainly wouldn't match one of those, and an external ATU would struggle as well. So by putting a matching unit at the base of the antenna, you can bring that down to SWR 1-to-1 very easily. So it depends what you've got and what antenna you're using. If we got some funny stories, I burnt one ATU out with a G5RV and 100 watts on 10 meters once at a JOTA event. And that was just a case of, it was a very, very poor match on 10 meters and tuning it up on full power. So lesson one is, if you're using an external ATU or an internal ATU even, turn the power down as you're doing it, then turn the power up once you've matched it. Otherwise, you can get smoke.
But typically 5 or 10 watts, Steve, something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I didn't notice. I was too busy trying to tune the damn thing. It was only when this scout said, is there meant to be smoke coming out of that? We realised.
And he was serious. Oh, dear.
Yeah. So I had to replace the switch in that one, but I haven't done it again. But yeah. So, that's it, really. I mean, other than what Malcolm has said, I think it was a pretty good description of what you can do with an ATU. They're a handy tool to have. I think every ham should have one, but you don't necessarily have to rely on it. It can just be something that you need if you want to work another band that your antenna isn't resonant for. But there we go.
Thank you, Steve. Well, that's really good advice, and with your wide experience of antennas and things, I'm at this point, I'm just going to show you the insides of this. Now, this is an appeal. I'm looking at everybody at home, and I'm glad that we've got lots of experience looking in on Zoom. But I know that there'll be quite a few of you watching who just started maybe in the hobby. Maybe you're M7s, or maybe you've had your foundation license for some time. Maybe that's enough for you. But hopefully you're here as well to learn from some of the things you're going to hear tonight. And one of the things that I think is always interesting, if you know the basics of some of the electronics, is to find out what's inside an average ATU. And as I said, I rushed home to get this just before we started. This is actually an LDG RT100. It's a remote antenna tuner, and it's fairly waterproof, actually. I've just taken the case off it, and this can be mounted outside, and it's got a little remote control box. That means you can control it from inside, from the shack. And some antennas, you have to actually put this anyway at the bottom of the antenna. I think a doublet might be one of them, actually. I'm not the expert to ask. But what I wanted to do anyway is just show you the insides, because if you're like me and you're curious about what makes something. Because from this, you can get a pretty good idea about what an ATU does. If I can try and hold it as still as I can. There we are. You can see that by far the most dominant thing there are lots of white things, and they are relays. And then you can also see to your right lots of coils on ferrites. And they're the bits really, the coils on the ferrites, are the things that are going to match the antenna to the radio. So they're the things that's going to tweak it. And the relays are there to switch those in as appropriate. And then on the far left of your screen, or on the circuit board, sort of here, you can see that's the chip, the master chip that's going to control that to find the best match for the antenna. So that's the essentials of what's inside. You can see it takes quite a bit of space. I suppose we're looking here at about 150 by 150 millimeter square circuit board. So to fit that in radios is quite a challenge anyway. And as Steve said, a lot of the time it might be better and more flexible to have something that's outside. But I hope you find that interesting. Rather than you have to open yours, I've opened mine. And yes, before somebody says it was in a cupboard and it hasn't been used yet, but I intend it to be, because it is rather nice, because you can put this wherever and you can control it from the control box. Cleverly, it sends it actually down the RF cable, so you haven't got send a separate control lead, control signal. This is to say, this particular one's made by LGG, but there's quite a few on the market, and there's the controller in the front. There we are. So that's just one ATU to show you what it's all about. Now, I could go around a list just sequentially and everybody at home, but I think actually what we'll do, Tammy, if we could have a look at everybody there, and who would like to talk next? Because I'd rather, let's make this a conversation. Would you like to put the hand up now at home? Oh, okay, Tony, right next on the list. Let's go to you. If you could unmute, and we'll come to you. Good evening, M0TDK.
Good evening, David. Good evening, Tammy. Can you hear me?
We can hear you fine. Yeah, lovely.
Oh, good. I've got everything plugged in correctly then. Just a comment. I've got an Elecraft K3, and the ATUs in them will tune to 10 to 1. So, there are some rigs which will go beyond 3 to 1 with their built-in ATUs, and the K3 is one of them. In fact, I very rarely use it because all my antennas are pretty close to resonant on the bands I use. So I don't need it. But when I first started, I used one of these. So he's picking it up and waving it about, which is a...
If you can put it in front of your face, Tony, because otherwise the way Zoom works, it'll try and focus in on your face, if it can see your face. So now we might struggle with this. I think
it's because it's got the background blurred.
Yeah. Oh, yes, that's right. You've got the background blurred as well. Whoever said that, I think Chris told us that.
But you can't. It won't focus on it unless you unblur the background.
No.
Well, I shall throw it casually over my shoulder.
That's all right.
It's a manual MFJ 969, which, on field days and things like that, when you've got pigeons and fish and things hanging on your antenna,
yeah,
it's quite useful. But by and large, I find the K3's internal ATU, when I need to use it, is fine. As I say, it'll go to 10 to 1, which is quite a wide margin. But as Steve rightly said, that most ATUs that are built in only go to 3 to 1. But again, most of my antennas are resonant on a good day. I'm just actually I've got a very large Wyndham. When I say very large, it's 82 meters long, which gives you an idea of what I mean by very large. And this tunes, 1 to 1, even without an ATU or very close on 80 and top band. And it's probably best on 40, but again, I'm just using nearly resonant antennas, which I find is, probably easiest, because then you don't really need an ATU. So really, I shouldn't be talking to you because I don't use them.
Well, no, but it's good, isn't it? This is what I think we're trying to get over, particularly for the beginners in the hobby you might be watching. It's important that in an ideal world, you don't need them because they are compromises. You will almost certainly lose some efficiency in your signal. You'll lose power and other things, and could even have problems. And I guess another good reason, actually thinking about it, as Steve said, to have an external ATU is that if you do damage it, you maybe won't take the whole radio out, but you'll take your external ATU. So if something goes wrong. Anyway, Tony, thanks very much for sharing that. Let's have a look at everybody else now at home. And who would like to talk next? Who'd like to put? Okay, Steve's hand went up first, so I'll come to him. Steve, G3 EVA. Good evening. Just need you to unmute, and then we.
I'm unmuted. Yeah, I don't generally use ATUs, but I have several of them. My antenna is a mag loop, so my tuning is done by a capacitor within the mag loop. But this is, if we can get it on there, so it's an MFJ, and it's similar to what you shoot, but this is a manual version of it. You don't have relays or anything to change the inductance or capacitance. It's all done inside. Wow. You have two capacitors, one for the transmitter and one for the antenna. And this is the inductance here, and it's tapped. If you look on the side, it's tapped off in various places on the side.
So the middle control then on the front panel is a switch, basically, that switches in and out different inductors?
That's right. That's different bands.
Right.
And then you just tune the transmitter and the transmitter this side, and the antenna the other side. This only does about, I think it's 100 watts, so which is fine because I'm using a Yaesu FT920, although it has a built-in tuner which works fine as well. So I've got lots of different ways to tune, but with the mag loop you don't need one of these really. If you do, it's making it more inefficient, as well as it does with any antenna really. It loses energy inside this unit.
And I guess the other nice thing with something like that is that looking at it, it really is quite simple. And I guess if something does go wrong, you've got a better chance of fixing it yourself.
Yeah, it works on the same theory as yours, really, but this doesn't have all the relays in to change the inductance or capacitances.
No, well, I think the main object with mine was that it's especially, not only is it can be automatic, but it's remote. and it can be, you know, underneath the aerial, at the bottom of the aerial or something, which could be some distance away from the shack. Okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Steve. Thanks for sharing that. That's really good to see the insides of a true, pure ATU, really. That's what you've just shown, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. I've got a really nice Kenwood one, which does, I think it's up to about 500 watts. And that's a unit about so big. It's a very big bit of kit. But I put that away because I just don't need it anymore.
Brilliant.
Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Steve. Thanks for joining us. And just a reminder to you at home, if you've joined us a little bit later and you'd like to join us on the Zoom call of this, and of course you're welcome just to watch, but if you want to interact with us, you can find the link to the Zoom call on our website, norfolkamateurradio.org. You'll find the story there and you can just click on that, or there's the meeting ID at the bottom of your screen now. Tammy's just put it up. Or you could, but the easiest way is probably to click on that if you've got access to the website or the newsletter. So you're very welcome to join us. Okay, let's go and look at talk to everybody at home. By the way, I've got some pictures which people like Paul has sent us, and Roger and Mark has sent us some pictures as well, and I've got all those for when you come on. So let's have a go to look at everybody at home now, if we can, Tammy, please. And who would like to go next? Oh, okay, we've got Steve. Steve Webb, over to you.
Yeah, hi. It's interesting. Several years ago, I did an analysis of the ATU that Steve was just showing, and I modelled it so I made a lot of measurements and then modelled it, and could see where it worked so well and where it didn't. But I'd like to. I could probably dig up the article if I looked hard enough. It would have been in the Chelmsford Radio Club newsletter. But anyway, I'd like to emphasise the importance of using a remote ATU where you can. I mean, Tony's comment about the aircraft matching up to 10 to 1, that's all very well, but if you've got any length of feeder out to your antenna, of course you've got the SWR on that feeder, which is not helping matters, as has been said. But the reason I comment on that in particular, I mean, it is common sense to put the ATU at the as close to the antenna as you possibly can, and even at the antenna, you know, like at the base of a NFED or something. The reason I stress this is because I took apart several lengths of coax which I came across and which had suffered high SWRs, and the copper inside them, you could see whereabouts the peaks and the troughs, or the peaks of the SWR had existed on these cables, because in a cyclic fashion along the length of the cable, you've got these areas of not so much burnt, but particularly tarnished and discoloured areas of the copper, both on the outer and on the inner. The inner in particular, you get bright copper, then you get black, and then you get bright, and then you get black, and so on. And I also noticed this phenomenon. When I had an outside shack many years ago, I had several lengths of cable which were acting as a ground feed. I had a distributed ground, and I noticed when I disconnected all this for various reasons, I stripped the wires back, and I found that some of those wires had. It's a form of it almost looked as though the copper had been anodized. I know you can't do that, but it looked like it was bright, shiny black in some places and bright copper in others. And I'm absolutely convinced that this is due to the high voltages or the high currents that exist at various parts. So although you're actually creating a match, you don't know really what you're doing to the copper or the inside of the feeder. So again, you know, if you can, put the ATU out in your garden, get a remote one like David's demonstrated, far more effective than using the internal ones, either manual or rig. I think that's probably all I'd better say on the matter.
No, that's really good actually. So to so if you unless your antenna is fortunate to be just straight above your shack, and as you say, the piece of feeder between it, that's going to be all unmatched between that and the ATU. So that's really good advice. Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you. I saw Chris's hand go up a few times, so I think we better go to you next, Chris. So G0DWV, good to see you.
That's the one. Yeah. Hi. Just obviously line loss is something that you try and eradicate by using better quality feeders. So Steve's completely right. I think with the you increase the loss in the piece of feeder between the ATU and the antenna if you're matching it at the start with the ATU. Anyway, lots of people go out and buy ATUs that are made by MFJ and all the latest and greatest and spend an absolute fortune on some of them. What I wanted to show you, and I'll just move my camera, is an old ATU back from the 70s made by a company called Drake. It's rated at 2 kilowatts.
Oh.
Not that I know what that is.
No.
But when you start looking at the size and the quality of the components inside, you get a bit of a feel for, it's built like a tank and it will match anything. You've got switched bandpass inductors there, and you've got obviously capacitors at this side, and they're really, really quite large. I mean, the whole thing weighs something like 6 kilos or 5 kilos. It's got various outputs on the back for there's a balun as well, so you can run a long wire if you want, or a balanced line, or if you've got matched antennas, and obviously there's direct, so you can have a tri-bander connected on one output and then have the need to have an ATU on if you want to use an ATU. And the thing is, some of this older kit, it isn't recognised. They don't value it. They want to have the latest PAL Star or the latest and greatest MFJ. And you can pick something like this up, which is, I have to say, enormous. For a couple of £100, and that will last you forever because you'll never really break it. On the alternative is something similar to yours, David, that you showed earlier. This is a little Z11 Pro from LDG. It's got 2 AA batteries or 4 AA batteries in it. We've used it at the base of an antenna in a plastic box. It automatically tunes itself. You put RF into it, you tune it up, and then it instantly changes. And then another way of matching antennas at the feed point, if you use quarter wave verticals, for instance, the impedance at the feed point is not going to be 50 ohms. You're going to be looking at 36 ohms or something similar. And sometimes your transceiver doesn't like that, so you use something like a hairpin match. By moving the coil in and out, you can actually adjust the impedance up to 50 ohms. That's made out of a piece of brake pipe, soldered a couple of tags on the end, an SO239 socket there, and that will match a vertical at any sort of power level you care to try. I use that on my 160 vertical in the winter, so
that's
good way of
yes,
impedance matching at the antenna. So
in the most basic and raw form and everything. I think the only thing I just want to emphasise again to beginners particularly, that there are very high voltages that appear at these points. No, so it's but I think it's easy to maybe forget if you're just starting. You've got 12 volts feeding into it, and there's almost a feeling of safety because it's only 12 volts going in. But there are hundreds and hundreds of volts often coming out, depending on what power you're running and what band, etc., and the matching. But literally, that's not the sort of thing you touch when it's on, is it?
No. I mean, you can use this principle on any antenna. If you got a resonant antenna, but you can't get the SWR down, if you just put this across the feed, not necessarily this side, it'd be more turns or less turns. There's all sorts of calculators online to get an idea of what sort of size inductor you put across. But generally, you can get an idea fairly quickly. You can make it out of just 1.5 mil wire as long as it'll hold a coil. Make it work, then measure it, and then make one out of brake pipe, and it'll last forever. Well, I know, broke it actually, as I know said that.
But because you know how it's made and everything, you can fix it. Yeah. So that's a great advantage.
Plumber's delight, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So you don't need. Are you also saying really that you don't need to spend an absolute fortune on the latest, greatest? No. Yeah.
There's lots of old ATUs made by Drake and people like Nye Vikings, Collins. I mean, there's lots of older stuff that were built in the 60s and 70s when people had valve transmitters that would match into anything, but you obviously want to give it a reasonable match. So these things were produced, and yeah, they're built like tanks.
Yeah, thank you.
I think you ought to talk to Paul SEM next, because he knows a fair bit about ATUs.
He does, and he sent some delightful pictures of the secret weapon, as we call it here in Norfolk Amateur Radio Club as well. So maybe, as you say, if the others will forgive us, we'll go to Paul now. Paul G3 SEM. Good to see you, Paul.
Good evening. Good evening. Can you hear me all okay?
We can hear you fine. Yep, thank you.
Jolly good. I just realised while we've gone through the chat tonight that I've got about 10 ATUs, but I've concentrated on only one. But perhaps I ought to mention this is somewhat specialised, and for beginners might not be the thing, but we'll give it a go.
Let's show the first picture first, and then maybe you can just tell us why you've made this, because we'll get an idea of scale then, I think, when we show this picture.
Right, okay. Well, here we are. This is a homebrew ATU made for the Norfolk Amateur Radio Club. And basically...
Full screen, David.
We're not seeing the picture.
Put it on full screen. I can see the picture.
Well, it is full screen for us. That's what everybody at home's seeing, Roger.
No, it's the aspect ratio is not suitable for them. I could have laid it on that slide, Roger.
It looks like I've got my phone where it is. I mean, we all know what it is, Paul, but...
I think, actually, to be serious, at home, if you want to, you can have a look at... you can give priorities to your Zoom, and you can look at who's talking and that sort of thing, and you might be able to get a bigger picture from that. I think everybody watching on BATC and on Facebook actually can see that full screen, because they're only going to see one picture at a time, whereas all of you at home on Zoom are seeing everybody at the time.
There's a lot more pictures though, Roger. That'll all come clear. Yeah. Basically, if you have a look at that, you'll get some idea of the scale. There's a 1 meter rule leaning on the left-hand side. So it's not for mobile use. Basically, I did some...
And portable, Paul.
Yeah, and it takes 2 people to lift it.
Yes.
I did some homework on a NFD site and wondered why we weren't doing particularly well. And I did some calculations and found that we were wasting 2 hours of in 24 hours sessions of tuning up various aerials, and they weren't working very well. And I got chastised. So I thought, this is ridiculous. We're losing 10% of our operating time. So if you'd like to change the slide, I feel a bit like Professor Whitty here saying change the slide. But sadly, we didn't manage the reverse talkback, but that'll come another night. This ATU consists of 6 separate ATUs, all in a rack, and it's based on a design from 1998 by G0LMJ, and he used plug-in coils, but I thought if we're going to have to keep retuning it, we're going to lose 2 hours again. So I built 6, and they're all relay controlled, and you can switch within seconds to perfectly matched balanced aerials. So this is just basically for field day. I'll crack on. What's it? This is the top of the unit, designed for a balanced antenna. We changed.
Oh, sorry. I thought you wanted us to change. Sorry about that.
No, sorry.
We'll wait for you to say next slide, please. Just like Sir
Professor Whitty.
No, it's Sir now. Sir now.
Well, yeah, all right. There's a balanced meter at the top, and I just would say, all you people who are very keen and say, oh, well, 0.1 of a dB doesn't matter and whatever. In contest work, don't forget 10 0.1 dBs equals 1 dB, and that could mean winning or losing, and also it inspires confidence if your SWR is reduced, or VSWR is reduced to almost anything, almost nothing. But of course, if you change slide, next slide, please, thank you. You'll see here another shot in the rear, so to speak, the open wire feeder from all the ATUs is connected by relays, and we'll go to the next slide as well, if we could, please. Thank you. And very quickly, at the bottom, power supply, remote switching, 12-volt supply. And I would just like to pass on thanks to the large number of Norfolk amateurs who managed to get all these slow motion drives, because it's very hard to reset these things quickly, but it has helped an awful lot. And the little library scratch pads, you can make notes of what the dial settings are for a 160 meter top or a 273 meter top. And if we go on to the next one, this is the circuit diagram, and there isn't a lot in it. The top half is the balanced feeder indicator. I'll come to that later. And the bottom half is the ATU. Now, nothing is left to chance here. The link coupling, that's the bit that comes from the transmitter right at the bottom into the middle of the coil, has got a capacitor in series with it to get rid of any resonance problems. And there are two capacitors either side, so they're not gangs, so you can balance them because obviously no aerial in the sky is, unless in free space, is balanced. So you can compensate for any irregularities like being next to trees or parked cars and things like that. Change slide, please. There's another poorly focused shot at the back of the ATU, and you'll notice the capacitors, not quite as large as the ones in Chris's ATU, but I only rate this ATU at about 100 watts. Probably could run a kilowatt in it, but I don't think that's the thing. You'll see that the coils get a little bit larger as we go down the bands, 10 meters at the top there, 15, and then 20 meters. Change slide. Thank you. And this is the bottom section, and there's 40, 80, and 160 meters. Change slide. Here we have a shot inside, sorry about the cough, inside the 10 meter ATU. They are home built capacitors. Oh. And oh dear, everything is done to balance the ATU as much as possible. It isn't built in a metal box because it can unbalance the arrangement, and that's not good. There's the capacitor for the link in the middle there, 2 gang. You can either have 1 or 2 gangs, balance out any irregularities and get yourself down to a barest minimum on the VSWR. I like to run, when I set this up on 1, that's it, and it usually covers all the CW band, and that doesn't need touching until he gets put away. Next slide, please. There we are. There's another shot. You can see it's almost laid out like the circuit diagram. The coil in the bottom there, the link is the brown coil. All the coils are tapped so they can be adjusted for resonance, and all the capacitors are on slow motion drives, insulated spindle. please. Change slide. There we go. Now some details at the back of the unit, and you'll see some 450 ohm twin going down there. They go out into a relay. Two connectors either side, obviously, so it's balanced. And you start off with 10 meters. You press the 10-meter button. The relay goes across, points up the feeder. When you release, you select the 20-meter. All the relays above it close, and then the 20-meter one comes in. And of course, if there are no power supplied to any of the relays, the 80-meter ATU is connected at the bottom. Change slide, please. Now, this looks pretty miserable, really, but this is a balanced feeder indicator. And you set this up. There's a little set of instructions, very simple. And the idea is that you can read the current in both legs of the antenna and see that they are identical. So it's quite simple, parallel wires at the top there to get a little bit of a pickup, but very simple, works perfectly. Change slide. This is the 160-meter coil right at the very bottom, and the power supply and ATU. I haven't bothered to take it apart. It's quite a job to get it completely apart, but I think you get the gist of it all. Is that the last slide, chaps?
It is, yes. I mean,
right. So that's it.
You're very modest though, Paul, because I mean, you just mentioned there those homemade, the capacitors are homemade, like everybody would make homemade capacitors. I mean, that must have seriously took a huge amount of work. I mean, have you got any idea of how many hundreds of hours, I guess it would be?
Oh, no, not really.
Really?
You can, I got the capacitor blades laser cut by a firm in Norwich. That's as simple as that. The Perspex stuff I got cut from another website, drilled. So that didn't take too long. I think the longest thing was the MDF board and putting the varnish on and waiting for it to dry, really.
Really?
Yes.
Well, when are you starting to sell the kit then, I think, is the answer.
No. This is, I'd like to think this is quite unique in the country.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
We've been very modest, David.
Exactly, that's what I think.
He put a lot of work, a lot of effort and time into that, and it worked extremely well.
That's kind of you to say so. There's still some work to be done. I'm hoping to. I've left space for a printed circuit board for an RF detector, so that it should be able to switch itself. So, you know, if you're on 20 meters, fine. You then switch to 80. If you send a couple of pips of tone, the thing will switch automatically to 80. At the moment, we have to use a switch, manual switch. But,
which takes about half a second.
Well, I want you to win the contest, not spin around.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. It's very good. Excellent.
It is an excellent bit of work. In fact, it's one of the reasons, Paul, you won Malcolm, our President's Award.
Well, thank you to everyone. It was a delight making it. There's still a little bit of tidying up to do. I know you'd like to see sides on it, David, but really, if you're seeking those last 0.1 dBs, don't put your hand in and... It'll be all right. Originally, it was intended to go on the operating table, but the device got heavier and heavier, and now it literally does take two people to lift, which is maybe not ideal, but there we are.
I'm glad you're talking about the ATU. I thought you might be talking about the person who put their hands inside on the operating table, but I'm glad you elaborated on that.
Yeah.
Paul, no, it is a wonderful bit of engineering, but and rather like Steve's basic manual ATU as well, it really does show the bare bones and exactly the principles. There's no magic, is there? Really, it's
no. Keep it simple, stupid has been my motto for a long time, and they don't come much stupider than I. So.
I don't think so. Well, anyway, it's a wonderful bit of engineering, and if you've seen that and you want to see it in the flesh, then hopefully it won't be too long before we do another field day of some kind, and then you'll see that in its glory. But just don't touch it.
It is a bit of a specialised ATU because obviously it only works on balanced antennas, or loop antennas. So that's a bit unfortunate. If you're then going to do verticals and bits and pieces, absolutely worthless. So there you are. But I've got one or two other ATUs I could show you on another occasion.
All right. Well, Paul, that's been lovely. Thank you for taking the pictures, sending it to us, and for talking us through it. It's a wonderful project. Thank you.
Any questions? I'll happily take them later on.
All right. Thank you. But now let's have a look at everybody at home now and see who would like. Put your hand up if you'd like to come on next. Henry, good to see you. If you can unmute, and then we'll come to you.
Hello, everybody. Yes, one thing to remember when people were saying about the internal ATUs and another one on the outside, remember the one on the outside needs to be a manual one. Otherwise, if you've got two automatic ones fighting against each other, they tend to not play nice.
Can you use two then together, Henry?
To basically get most of it in the ballpark, and then the manual one just for laziness because you just prod a button. The other thing, of course, remember with the automatic ones. They will tend to stop at the first satisfactory match according to the built-in algorithm. So it's often worthwhile having another little tweak just to see if you can get a bit better on the automatic ones.
Sounds like a couple of really good tips there. What sort of ATUs do you use?
What is it? I've got an MFJ, I've got an LDJ, I've got the one that was shown earlier with the roller coaster in it, and I've got one that's just a coil and a capacitor.
Just the basics again, like we've seen, yeah. Good, but that's a really good tip about using two together, though. I think it's excellent. If you use two automatic ones, they're both going to disagree or fight each other. So, thank you. Thanks very much for joining us, Henry. Good to see you. Who else would like to come on? Andy, we haven't seen you for a while. It'd be good to see you. So can we come to you? Andy M0NKR, if you'd like to unmute and we can come to you.
Hello.
We can hear you, yeah. A little bit iffy on the internet maybe, but anyway, good to see you.
Evening all, thanks. Not a lot of experience with ATUs really, being fairly new to the hobby, only 10 years in or just over. So as others have said, I try to use matched antennas basically here at home, but from past experience of SSB field day, Chris and I have tried matching a dipole antenna, I think it was, on 40 or 80, and we tried the MFJ, typical ATU. We tried various of those makes and the cheaper makes, and we couldn't get a match into the antenna. So I retired home to pick up the hefty Powstar ATU. Not a cheap ATU, I think. Probably second-hand prices at the moment is around about £500. I think they were about £800 new. And I returned to the field day with that, put it in line, and we got an instant match on the antenna using the Powstar. But none of the other ATUs that were available in the field at the time would provide a match for that antenna. So that's basically a little bit of experience that I've had with ATUs.
Was that a manual one, Andy? Was that that a manual?
It's a manual ATU, yeah. Rated up to about 1500 watts, so obviously not a small ATU by any means. But yeah, all the others that we tried were manual as well, but it wouldn't provide a match.
Wow. No, I think if some of us who follow... No, carry on, sorry.
Pardon?
No, please carry on.
The other ATU really that I use here in the shack is built into the amplifier. The Expert 2K has a built-in ATU, but that's the only other ATU that I tend to use in the shack, but that's only to provide a little bit of a match if I was to sort of go on a part of the band that the antenna's not tuned for. So, for example, if I got my antenna tuned, ideally, I'm an SSB operator on 80 meters. If I was to go there one evening on 80 and I see a DX station that I need down on the lower part of the band, I may use the ATU in the amplifier to bring a match in to use the antenna lower down on the band. But ideally, if I know there's de-expeditions or anything going on, then I will sort of go down the garden and adjust the antenna. But on a cold night or whatever, if I don't want to run down there and do it, I just use the ATU in the amplifier to provide a match. So that's basically my experience of ATUs. But ideally, use the matched antenna because you get more power out and everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those of us who follow you on Facebook and things, we know that you've done a lot for the first time on top band at 160 meters. Does that, because that seems to be particularly quite difficult to do, does that prove need extra sort of help with antenna matching and antenna tuning? So
I don't use an ATU on top band. The design that I used there was very similar to Chris's design, using a hairpin match. So I've got a coil there that you just change the inductance and impedance at the antenna, tapping at various points to provide the right match for the SWR, and the correct ohmage.
Okay, well, that's good. Thank you for sharing that with us. And someone else who says that, if you have got to use one, get it as near the antenna and not the end of the shack end of the feeder. So Andy, thank you very much for sharing all that with us.
Can I just make a comment, David?
Yes, Malcolm, certainly. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I think also, just at this point, it might be worth just saying that very often you might find an automatic ATU will not make a match to with the antenna and the rig sometimes, but if you put in a manual one, generally speaking, a manual one you will find a match. It might be a little bit tricky, but it will find a match that will work, whereas an automatic one just may not be able to do it.
Yeah, and I guess that's what Henry was saying, really, is they just can't, and especially if you try and use two,
Well, I actually, the practice of using two, I wouldn't personally recommend because they're going to confuse each other. You don't need two. If you've got an internal ATU in the rig, but you need to use an external one, I would just use the external one and bypass the internal one because they will start confusing each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
The only other thing I sort of mentioned as well with regards to remote ATUs, it's all right probably for home use, but in sort of like a field day station where you've got multiple stations operating, the RF generated there, it tends to switch bands and sort of play havoc, and because of all the other RF generated, it sort of switches in and out, or will go to another band because of the harmonic, and all different things. So just be warned with auto ATUs, they can be sort of a menace out in sort of field day events.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Andy, as well. They get RF into them and start switching the logic.
Yeah, I mean, can I just read to, I know there's all of you at home at the moment, And we'll come to you, Chris, as well. I can see you waving a bit of equipment up out of me. We've got a question from, it was asked some while ago, from Rodney, G0CBO, and says, why do some radios' internal ATUs work better than others? As Steve mentioned, the specs seem to vary between very well-known rigs. Is it simply just the spec they're built to? Anybody got any thoughts about that? Steve?
I'll take that one, maybe.
Thank you, yeah.
I think it's probably down to cost. Obviously, the more bands you want to cover, you've got to add more inductance into the auto ATU. So that's why probably they restrict them to 3-to-1. Like I said, 3-to-1 on Yaesu and a little bit more on ICOM. I can't say about the 7300. I'm used one for a while. But certainly on a 756 Pro 3, it would tune an awful lot more. But I'm sure it's nothing to do with their ability to be able to design an ATU that can do it. It's probably just cost.
And I guess it's just part of the rig and maybe doesn't have as much value. I think John G2E0TWQ put down that the new price of that PALSTAR or a PALSTAR is £700. I mean, that's quite a lot of money, and some people don't spend that on the actual rig, do they? So I guess that's what you're saying, Steve, as well. It's this proportionate amount of money inside the rig that's spent on the ATU part of it compared to the rest of the transceiver.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think an internal ATU that can only manage 3-to-1 is, I wouldn't say useless, but it's not much use, to be honest.
No, it might get you out of a hole if you've got a closely matched antenna maybe somewhere and you just need to tweak it, but okay. Thank you. Thanks very much, Steve. I've got another comment here from Ian Liston Smith, who says, I think the ATU should probably be placed at the far end of the coax if possible, so that it matches the antenna from that point. For example, at the junction of the coax and ladder or a G5RV and not in the shack. Auto ATUs also don't make it obvious that you have an antenna fault, whereas a manual one you can see that the settings have changed. That's a very good point, isn't it? I guess that an automatic ATU could hide that up from you. Have we got any other comments, Tammy? I beg your pardon. Yeah, there is another comment on that. And Ian finishes saying, another point to remember is that auto ATUs may not work on QRP. I use 200 milliwatts of Whisper, but most ATUs won't detect such a low signal, so it won't try to match. So I guess, again, another case for using a manual one and not an automatic one. That's Ian G4JQT. So thanks for those comments on there. If you've got any comments for us, either on Facebook or BATC, we've got lots and lots of people at home, as you can see, who can have a go at answering a question. I'm sure they'll be delighted to as well. And by the way, Steve Webb, who's now signed from here, but he did just say, if anyone's interested, the article he wrote on modelling the MFJ971 is on the CARS website, which is the Chelmsford Amateur Radio Society website, g0mwt.org.uk, and its newsletter archive issue 611, February 2017. So that's on modelling the MFJ971, which was one of the ATUs that we saw earlier. That's all with the messages and things that we've got at the moment, so we're up to date with that. Who hasn't come on now? Jim has got his hand up, so over to you, Jim, G3YLA. Hello?
Yeah, hello, folks. Interesting stuff, and definitely second the comments about Paul's Magic Beast. I think that's truly a wonderful device, and it only accepts RF from Norfolk. If you take it outside of the county, it won't work. So there's no good trying to do a raid on the thing. My overall feeling is that I think my sympathies lie with the comment that Malcolm mentioned early on about the aim should be to get a good resonant antenna. And a good resonant antenna is not necessarily the same as having a good multiband antenna. So we all try, well, those of us with small gardens try and sort of squeeze as many bands out of it as you can. And it does lead to problems because you end up with poor compromised situations and put an awful lot on the shoulders of an ATU. So maybe one tip I'd probably offer would be to say pick 2 or 3 bands and get dedicated antennas for them and do them well. And understand also, I think the terminology is important. Whatever antenna design you pick, it will have at resonance a certain impedance. And the ATU doesn't change that impedance at resonance, you cut the antenna for the resonance, and then your impeller, your matching unit, and that's the term that's important, the matching part of it, matches that impedance, the coax. So one of the problems I have here, I run a flex, so it's a computer-driven system. And if you get high standing waves in the shack, the high SWR inside the shack, it can alter the RF, stray RF picked up by the voltage sensing circuits within the rig, and it will cause it to shut down and overreact. So the idea of getting things not into twin feeder into the shack, but into some balun outside where you take the coax to is a very useful one, because it keeps the high bad RF outside. And the other thing about having as long a run of good quality coax to the point where you do the matching is the right answer. So you get all of your clean RF in coax in the shack and do all the dirty stuff down the garden. The other point, of course, is that we've got access to modern kit now that you couldn't imagine years ago when we started. So in the days of home building ATUs, and I haven't built an ATU in years and years and years, but we now have these nano VNAs and bits of kit that will allow you to find out everything there is to know about your antenna. So there's no excuse for not understanding what you're trying to match into and having some idea of what the ATU has to do, whether it be remote or closer to the shack. So my vote would be remote ATU, get the coax into the shack, but not twin feeders. And if you are stuck for property size and antennas, then concentrate on 2 or 3 bands and do them really well. And if you are going to have a compromised antenna, then I'm afraid you've got to expect tough times with ATUs.
Good, wise advice, Jim. Thank you for that. There's some really good extra gems there adding to this evening. I hope you're enjoying this at home and learning from this. As I said before, if you've got any questions or anything, we've got a panel of very experienced people there who will, I'm sure, be able to help you. And just drop it down the note on Facebook or on BATC, and we'll relay them to them. So let's see, who haven't we talked to yet? We haven't talked to Alan yet, or to Julian, or to Roger. Who would like to go next? Alan, right, over to you. If you could unmute, please, Alan.
Evening all. No, what I was thinking is we've talked an awful lot about ATUs. What I would be more interested in to know is what people are using for checking their antennas. I use one of these, which is rather expensive. And when I was at the last field day, Andy was using a very, very lovely piece of kit. And it's the SARC 110, which I also use. I use this more than anything, to be fair. And just wonder what everybody else is using. So how about passing that around the group? Pass it to Steve first, because he's got the most experience, I think.
But firstly, could you say what those things were, Alan?
Yeah, these are antenna matching units for, that's it, for checking all of your equipment. I use this at the shack end, and all of my antennas are resonant. I also use very, very expensive heliacs to all of my antennas. That runs underground to the antenna, and I spend hours and hours using the antenna tuner checker to find out exactly what my antennas are doing.
Alan, we can't see very much because it's a black box, but Chris held his up a moment ago.
Yeah,
It
Chris,
switched on.
put yours up.
So if we could
Yours
hold
is
that up
set
again,
up.
what we'll do is we'll switch to Chris's screen, and that
Yeah,
will give
that's
everybody an
better.
idea. Now, this is something that's, I think, under £100 or so, isn't it, nowadays? Is that right?
Yeah, I think they're about 55, 60 quid or something.
I think
it's a nano VNA basically, and it does S11 and S21 measurements. Obviously, you get the Smith's charts. I think it does up to 3 gigs. It's pretty good. You have to calibrate it with an open, short, and a load, and then do some through measurements by joining the 2 cables together to sort of calibrate it. And then what you stick on there or there is essentially calibrated. I actually do use, I've got profile set in here. So when I put this on at the shack end, the piece of feeder all the way to the top of the tower has been sort of calibrated out effectively. So when I look at the measurement of the antenna, I'm actually looking at the measurement of the antenna because I've taken out all of the cable with the through calculation on the Nano VNA. Now, this is a really cheap one, and I wouldn't say it's stupidly accurate, but it is pretty good. It gives you a really good indication. You can obviously display on, the bandwidth that you want to look at, and it's pretty accurate. And if you put an antenna up that's wildly cut or not very accurately cut, you can sweep 2 or 3 megs and then sort of see where it's resonant and get a bit of a clue, then zoom in, trim it or whatever you want to do, and come up with a sort of really reasonable match. Smith's charts are not everybody's cup of tea, as everyone probably knows. If you've tried to read up and understand them, you understand it on the day you read all the information, maybe, but then a week later you can't. But it's a visual indication of what you're looking at as far as the resonance and the impedance of your antenna is. I mean, ideally, what you need to do is get the little dot in the middle.
Yeah,
the green dot in the middle.
I was going to say, Chris, it's a lovely bit of kit, and it looks, for anybody who loves gadgets as well, it's lovely. But for a lot of people,
it's cheap as chips.
It is cheap.
Cheap,
I mean, it is
chips.
ridiculous that they're under £100.
Yeah.
But one thing I'm just thinking again, I keep thinking of the beginners, absolute beginners who've just done this, and they've heard about getting the SWR low and things and matching. We should just explain that picture on there, the bottom was the frequency. It was a bit like, if you've heard of a spectrum analyzer, it's kind of like one of those, isn't it? Where you've got a spectrum of frequency from the bottom left to the bottom right, will go between, let's say, I don't know, 6 megs and 8 megs, something like that, say.
Yeah, this is 50 kilohertz
okay.
to 900 is what that's actually showing.
So along the bottom then, that's what you've got. And then what you're seeing is the reactance, isn't it, from the antenna? Probably the wrong word I've used there. But the response from the antenna, the matching, the resonance of the antenna as we go along the frequency from the bottom left to the bottom right. Would that be fair?
Yeah, what you get is you get various display criteria up here. You can actually set different colors for different things. So I've got this set up as the yellow trace will be SWR. The green trace, effectively, you can just see a little green piece. That's the impedance, and what you're looking for is a little green dot and circle in the middle, which which gives you a curve of impedance. I've also got what else is I can't read it, and you've got 2 different ports. So the ones on this side are for the top port, and the ones at the bottom are for the other port. So you can do several different things on the display at one time. So you can look at an SWR curve. You can look at a Smith's chart that gives you the impedance. You can look at for cutting stubs or for multiple lengths of coax. I think it's Again, when I read the instructions, I understand it for a day or two, and then when I don't read them, I have to refresh my mind. But I think it's every 90 degrees on the Smith's chart as a quarter wave, or it might be every 180 degrees as a quarter wave. So you can measure stubs, you can cut them, and I mean it's a handy piece of kit, and it can do as much or as little as you want it to do. If all you want to do is see where your antenna is resonant and then see what the impedance is, 2 things will, you can quickly get an idea of what you're doing. And especially things like this hairpin match, you lay this on the floor next to where you're kneeling on the ground, and you squeeze it in and out, and you can see a direct comparison to what you're doing, so you can quickly tune things. I mean, it makes handy things.
That's the lovely thing, isn't it, Chris? It's visual as well, so you can actually cut a little bit of antenna off, if you're doing a long wire or something like that, and you can have a look at it, and you can actually see how close you're getting then to the particular frequency that you want to tune to. John Atwood just come on. John 20TWQ has just come on and said, he's found one on eBay already for $49.95. So as you say, they're very, very cheap. Although he uses, he says, most of the time a Rig Expert AA30, which I think if we go back to Alan now.
If you look at Andy, he's got his switched on.
Oh, okay. We'll go back to that. I was going to say, Alan, you held up a box, and I guess that.
Yeah, but Andy's got his switched on, which shows you.
Oh, lovely. Okay, let's go to that. Oh, yes. Oh, is that what you had? Oh, I see. Right. It's quite different then to what Chris had on.
But it does the same. It's got varying displays.
Can we see that again, Andy? Sorry, we if you could just hold it still again up there. We kind of only just got a little bit of it for everybody at home watching, not on Zoom. Oh, okay. Well, that's nice. So it's an LCD display, I suppose, but it's showing you both those things. Is that really easy to use, Andy?
You're muted.
Just a thumbs up, Andy. Is that easy to use?
Yeah, very easy to use, and you can plug it into the computer. You can also record on the computer everything that it's reading. So you can go back months after and check your antennas and see what they were months ago. So that's the sort of stuff that the young guys need to be aware of.
And what's that one called?
Hold on.
It's a SARC 110.
A SARC 110.
Yeah.
It's around about 350, 400 pounds. It's very similar to the Nano VNA. It does all the Smith's charts, various displays. It comes with bits so you can make coils and whatever, the loads and everything. You do the same, calibrate it. But yeah, it's a godsend really for if you're into making antennas and having resonant antennas and tuning beams or dipoles or anything. You know, it's a piece of kit to have in the shack.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And I mean, obviously, it's quite a lot more than the £50 or so, maybe for a but a lot easier to use for beginners.
Well, this one I've probably had about 5-6 years. Bought it in America, but this was sort of before the Nano VNAs were out on the market, really, for the price that they were. You know.
Yes.
It's just how technology has evolved and stuff's got. People come out with them designs and everything. But as Alan said, you can save the scans, the plots. You can load it up on a big screen, import, export. There's memory in it. So yeah, quite expensive, but worth the money.
Worth the money, yeah. It's like, and like Jim was saying before Alan came on, I think, you know, the fact that this sort of equipment wasn't available many years ago, but now cheap electronics has brought this really quite affordable. So that's really good. Thank you for sharing all of that. Alan, did you want to say anything more?
No, nothing really more. But as I say, it's ATUs are one thing, but I don't use ATUs. As I say, I spend a lot of money on very expensive coax and make sure my antennas are tuned to exactly where I want to use them on the band. The only one that I change from time to time is the 80-meter dipole for the CCs from SSB to CW to data. That's the only one that I change change the antenna to match the frequency I want to use. But I do reasonably well with it. I think I've done 90 countries this year so far, which is not too bad.
It's not bad for 19 days.
not as good as Andy.
Well, 19 days though, that's all it is.
Well, we're doing all right.
Thank you. All right. Yeah, and can we just quickly ask, how's your wife doing with her after her?
She's all right. She's all right. She's limping pretty badly at the minute, but I think she's done too much walking. Too much exercises, but there we are. I've got to take it to St Albans on Friday, so I'm going to meet up with Bob for a cup of tea and a mince pie. I think it was, Bob, wasn't it?
Well, we're all doing that now, Bob. So get the kettle on. It'll have to be a big kettle.
Yeah, you're quite welcome. No problems at all.
All right, we might take you up on that. All right, now.
That's it from my end. As I say, I'd be interested to know what other people are using to check their feeders and everything else. But Steve's disappeared, I think, hasn't he? He's the expert. But there we are. I'll leave it. I'll put it back to Jim.
Yeah, it's lovely because there's so much information. You know, when I said I started sort of thinking about this last year that we really ought to do some pure radio stuff and in the shack. And when I first thought of ATUs and antenna matching, it seemed a bit of a dry, boring subject, and how are we going to make something out of it? And here we are, over an hour later, still talking about it and still all learning from each other, which is the whole point about it also. So Jim, you had your hand up. Do you want to come back?
Yeah, something else occurred to me, which is possibly worth mentioning for folk who maybe are new to interactions with antennas that aren't fully resonant and making do with a compromised system. For example, if you tune up on 80 meters, you know, David, we do the 80 meter CC contest, so we're quite active as a club. And it means, as Alan just alluded to, going up and down the frequency allocation on 80. So 3 different spots on the band, which would, in the normal way of things, mean that you should have 3 different lengths for your antenna. Well, I know Roger and Malcolm go outside and fold bits of the ends back and so on, and they might want to explain the significance of that to the newcomers. But it's fairly obvious when you think about the resonant length, and it's going to be different at different ends of the band. But something that occurred to me, because I use a doublet here, so I've got twin feeder, homemade ladder line down to a balun outside the shack window, and then coax that comes into the shack. And when I tune this is within the CW section of the band, for example. So I'm within a portion of the band where I'm operating, and I'll tune the ATU in the rig, and I'll get a match of, say, 1.2 to 1 or 1.1 to 1, a pretty good match, and it works fine. First call to a station, usually get through. And then I'll tune up the band in search and pounce mode, and I might go 30 or 40 kcs up the band, and I'll call and I'll be in a queue and I'll think, oh, the conditions have changed, But when I press the automatic ATU in the rig and retune it, there's a significant difference in the response time for the other stations. Now, I couldn't tell you what the difference in SWR is because I tend not to look up, but it's of the order of, say, 1.5 to 1 to 1.1 to 1. It's that sort of difference. Now, you might think, providing it's below 2 to 1, we'll think, well, that's near enough, we'll use it. But in terms of response from the other stations, it's chalk and cheese. And I've sat there and called a station, not got through. And then as soon as I press the retune button on the rig, get through first time. So the message there is, don't think because you've tuned up on the band that that's it wherever you go on the band. If you change frequency by any significant steps, then make sure you retune.
Okay.
I will mention that you can also hear it as well on the receive end when you've got a mismatched antenna. The signals will be attenuated when it's not matched.
Yeah.
So you do realise sometimes when you're tuning around the band that your antenna's gone out of match.
So good advice, thank you. Good experience again, sharing. Thank you very much for that. We still haven't talked.
You can also tune your ATU on receive as well. If you listen, sometimes you'll find that you can actually move the ATU and hear the noise come up.
Yeah. Yes.
And you can use a nano VNA plugged into the input of the ATU and actually tune the ATU and see everything that you're doing on here, so you could probably understand a little bit more about what you're doing. You'll see you'll see the curve, an SWR curve move relative to how you move the capacitors and the inductors.
Good.
And the other thing with these modern rigs as well, the aerial matching circuits internally in the ATUs, it's not a continuous spectrum of a match that you're getting. They're quite often discrete 25 kc sets of banks of relays that switch in different bits of the coils. And you'll notice when you're tuning, suddenly the background noise will either go up or down very dramatically. And that's a sure sign that you've got to retune. And a lot of modern rigs with inbuilt ATUs that are very small in size will almost certainly have these little mini relays switching chunks of the band into play. And if you go outside of that, that will be a good indication to have a retune.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Thank you. We still haven't spoken to Julian or Roger, so I don't know which one of you would like to go ahead first. If you want to put your hand up, or which one of you? Julian, let's see you smiling there, so let's go to you. 2E0DJR. Good to see you.
Good evening, all. Yeah, nice to see you all. I've had some experience just recently with, about 3 years ago, I got the Icon 729 with its tuner. But it was external, it's not internal. It's an automatic tuner that works with it. It's made for, I suppose, I don't know. But 2 years ago, I got the DX Commander Classic and put that up. And I was having lots of problems trying to tune this in. And then Tim M1 MIT came over with his analyzer, and we worked it out quite well. And I had 4 bands on, 40, 30, 20, 17, and that gave me 15 as well, I think it was. But I was just saying what Jim was saying earlier on about changing addresses and moving to a smaller place. When I was over at Swannington, I had half an acre of land, and I had, I don't know, about four or five masts up there where there were scaffold poles stuck together and dug into the ground and all sorts of stuff. I think Chris has been over there a couple of times as well. But once I'm here, where I am at Blowfield, I've got like a postage stamp compared to what I had over there. So I had to go to a smaller, not a small antenna, or an antenna that takes up less space. So I went to the DX Commander and tried that. I tried 2 or 3 other things before that, but when I eventually saw that Canon was doing these, or making these antennas, I think I was one of the first to get one of them, the classic one, and put that up and put it all together. It took a bit of time, but it got it sorted. We got it up, and I've done quite a lot of contacts with it. And also wanted to get back into do contesting with the club as well. But recently, in that last storm, guess what? It came down. And it ripped out the pigtail at the bottom of the antenna that matches the ground planes and everything. So I'm looking for a bit of help to put it back up again. And I also want to change out the coaxes on my other 3 antennas that I've got up. But they're talking about the ATUs. Once it was, with the DX Commander, when it was up, the highest SWR was 1.7. I think the lowest on 10 meters, I think it was about 1.2, 1.3, something like that. But I find that sometimes when you're using this to talking to somebody, the frequency actually creeps a little bit. And when you're talking, this ATU, I don't know if it's a different one to everybody else is using.
So can you remind us again which ATU you're using now with this?
It's the ICOM, so IC729, and it's the ATU that comes with it.
Right, okay. So is it built in or a separate little box?
No, it's a separate unit.
Okay.
About the same size as the radio, actually.
Right, yes.
It's quite a hefty and heavy bit of kit. As soon as you talk again, or speak again, it applies itself. So it brings it back into tune again, if you clicked off a little bit. So I don't know. There must be something inside.
Well, I don't know if anybody's got any advice on that particular IC729. I think you said it was.
Yeah,
Julian. Yeah. So if anybody's got any experience of that, wave at
home.
It's
an older rig, and I did get it quite cheaply. But, yeah.
Okay. So if anybody's got any experience of that and can offer any advice, I think what was coming out earlier on though is that although automatic ATUs, automatic tuning units are nice, you haven't got any control on them. And it seems to me, just try and look at this fairly impartially tonight, that an ATU isn't always the golden answer, and that if you've got it manual, you can maybe make it tune up something that you wouldn't otherwise. Maybe you're running low power. Someone mentioned that running it on a few hundred milliwatts and they don't work very well. So
I've got a couple of the MFJ ATUs. One I've used originally at Swannington, but I've not used it here since you got the iPhone 729. Kit. I'm looking to get a sister one as well, which is a 2-meter multi-band.
Right. Well, if anybody's watching and who isn't maybe not on the Zoom call, but if you've got any suggestions on the IC729, got any experience of that, and maybe things that Julian could look at, drop us a line on an email, and we'll forward it to Julian and put you in touch. So I'm sure that might help you, Julian. Thanks. Anyway, good to see you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I don't have an analyzer, no.
Sorry, you?
I don't have an analyzer.
You don't have an analyzer?
The borrow. So if Chris wants to come across for his, he's never know.
Well, they're I mean, not for me, Sammy, but they're relatively, if you can get your head around how they work, the relatively low cost VNA, nano VNA. I was trying to think earlier, and I can't honestly remember. As you probably know, Tammy and I do quite a few of these sort of things now, and some of them for the RSGB and some of them for the club, and I can't remember which, but we did do a specific program on the nano VNA and I think it was for the RSGB, possibly.
It was Alan Walkie.
Alan Walkie, but was it for the RSGB or was it for
the RSGB? It was a Untitled AT. Yeah.
Okay, so if you are interested in the little nano VNA and you want to see a specific talk on it, because they are complex, as Chris said, if you look on the RSGB Tonight at 8 program, which I think is rsgb.org/webinars. If you look on there, you'll find one that's called the Nano VNA with Alan Walkie. And it was a very good talk, probably about a year ago now. And if you want to know more about how they work and what to do with them, he works for Tektronix. He's in the States. Very knowledgeable guy, though, and it's a very good talk, so I can recommend that. Anyway, Mal...
Pop over to Chris and see him.
Well, you can, but he says he forgets within a couple of days. So,
right, okay.
Well, we haven't spoken to Roger yet, and I really think we need to go to him because he sent me quite a lot here to read and a couple of pictures as well. And you look like you're in your smoking jacket. Well, it's probably not PC to say that now, is it, Roger? So, anyway, good evening. Welcome to Roger G3LDI.
Yeah, evening. I'm in the dressing gown.
All right.
Because the heating has broken down.
Oh no! Are you
anyway?
Okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, I've got it on again now, but it's not too hot around here yet, so not in this part of the bungalow.
Okay. And a serious point, Roger, just as a side, I've got quite a few convector heaters. If you did have a problem like that, let me know and I'll drop them over to you. I'm serious. That is a serious point, though. I don't want you to do that.
I'm fine, thanks, Dave.
Okay.
I'm all right. Alan Walkie's given that talk again on May the 4th for the club.
And is that for us? Okay, I couldn't remember because it all gets muddled, all gets jumbled in. Okay, that would be really good. So that's May the 4th. Or if you can't wait that long and you want to know how to use one, then have a look at the talk he gives. But of course, the talk he gives to the club means that you'll be able to interact with him as well.
Yeah, he's a very knowledgeable guy.
He is very, very good. Yes, he works for Tektronix by day, still an active engineer, sales engineer, and really, really knows his stuff. So that's good.
I'm hoping to book him for a few others as well, actually.
Yes, he does do some good ones.
He's a hard guy to nail down, actually.
He did give us one, if you remember, on some general test equipment, didn't he? The first one he gave was on...
Well, that was going to be the VNA.
Right.
You changed it.
Well, I changed it, Roger, because it was within 2 weeks of the one on the RSGB, and that seemed silly to do two of the same thing.
Yeah.
But he's coming to do it anyway.
He is going to do it for the club.
Yep. Absolutely, and you'll be able to. That means that everybody at home now will be able to ask him questions and things like that on it. So, so you sent me quite a long piece about and some pictures as well. Do you want me to read that, or do you want to read it, or do you want me to show you the pictures?
It's just a general description of the SPC transmatch, really. I mean, when I first came on the air during the Second World War, it was a thing that we had to do. We had to build everything in those days. So we had no linears, we had no towers, we had no beams. There wasn't any coax to buy. You couldn't buy ATUs. You couldn't buy anything. You had to make it yourself to get on the air. So I think everybody should go ahead and make their own ATUs, to be honest, and have a fiddle around with some aerials outside and learn the principles. But anyway, this one I made, this little QRP ATU, I made that just over 50 years ago. And the two knobs controlling a couple of variable capacitors, and the variable drive in the front there is a Millen drive from the States, which drives the variable inductor. And it's an SPC transmatch, so the split stator capacitor is on the output. It also helps to reduce harmonic radiation as well. And it gives a variable match just about anything, really, with a balanced feeder. I use that on the rhombic and with a 12-to-1 balun, and it serves as a multi-band antenna, the rhombic does.
So we're looking at the front picture at the moment, Roger.
Yeah. Those two drives, those slow motion drives, come from TU5B units. The TU5Bs were available down in Lyle Street and places like that as ex-government bits of equipment. And they had those lovely drives on, plus all variable capacitors inside them. So we bought those and stripped them down, of course, and used all the stuff inside them.
And this is the insides of it, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the inside. That's a 19-inch rack mounting piece of kit. It's about 24 inches from front to back. Those two capacitors, that's the split stator one on the left and a big 500 puff one on the right. And the variable inductor in the middle is a strip inductor actually. It's a half-inch strip, about millimetre thick, if not more than that. And it's driven by that mill and drive. The variable capacitors are mounted on ceramic standoffs, which you can see on that right-hand capacitor, so that they don't arc over to deck. And that's sort of a small QRP ATU. Works very well, and you can match just about anything to anything. But I've also got an Omega gamma match for the gamma feed on the tower. I gamma match the tower for 160 meters. And unlike Chris, I don't use a hairpin match. I use an Omega on there. That's built in a separate box at the base of the tower. And I think ATUs are fascinating to play with. It's a pity old Mr. ATU isn't on here tonight. You know, Mr. Johnson, he's got about 25 of them in his shack, I think. Or I think, no, he's sold one or two now, I think. But he's got a lot of ATUs and variable ways of matching aerials to, well, from 50 ohms to an infinite impedance. But open wire feeders were the only way to go when I first got on there, balanced feeders. And we had to build our own ATUs, of course. That old picture I sent of you in my shack in Norwich all those years ago, David, in sort of late 50s, that was a Z-Match ATU on there that I built. The Z-Match was a very popular circuit, actually, in those days, using Johnson 500 puff capacitors. And you had to build your own coils, of course, and switch it.
Is it? I mean, I haven't seen, I don't think, an article on a sort of construction article on making ATUs, because people who are just starting would probably want, you know, the real basics about how, you know, what parts they need. They may be willing to make it. Have you seen anything recently in Radcom or Practical Wireless or something like that?
Well, not lately, no, but there's loads of articles in antenna handbooks and things. You can circuit dial or do a Google search for them, homebrew ATUs. They're easy enough to make. I mean, you can't get anything simpler than an ATU, can you, really?
No.
Three components, a few bits and pieces to add on. And I mean, we built the test equipment I used in my days were a homebrew GDO, if you know what GDO is.
Grid oscillator. I forgot a point.
I worked Pat on one of those, would you believe?
Really?
Gave him a new country on my GDO.
Wow.
An impedance bridge, I built an impedance bridge as well, and one or two other things. SWR bridges, built several of those, mostly using coax actually, and strip wire instead of coax if you couldn't get hold of a bit of coax. The only coax we had resource to when I first came on the air were what was 80 ohm TV coax, David.
Yes.
And if you remember that brown string, that was, well, you would not even dream of using that. But that's all we had.
I tell you what, Roger, so I saw some TV coax the other day, which is still 75 ohm, and it was so ropey because copper's so expensive now. And to call it a braid was an insult. I think I've got more hair than there were copper strands, and that's not a lot.
I know, half-inch spacing between them.
Well, is that about me or the cable now? Are you talking?
No, the cable.
Oh, the cable, well, right, thank you.
I don't know. I'll have a close look now. But that cable was awful stuff.
It is, yeah.
But there we are.
But it gets you going, doesn't it? It's a way of learning about getting on the air and,
That's the only coax we had recourse to because there was nothing available. You couldn't, well, if there was to buy, none of us could afford it at that time anyway. The coax we use these days, like the Italian stuff, certainly wasn't any of that around on the market at all. And coax plugs, you've probably seen the photographs of poor old Pat's old shack. He still used them up until the day he died, I think. Bellinglee plugs.
I was going to say Bellinglee. They're the old TV. Well, they're still the same area plug, isn't it?
He used Bellinglee plugs and sockets. Would you believe?
No, they were worrying, weren't they? Because I remember I remember even if you didn't tighten them up quite enough, then the bit didn't grab the braid, and heavens.
Well, my first couple of transmitters used Bellinglee coax fittings on them because that's all we had available.
It's all that was available. Yes, I guess so. Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing all of that, Roger, and that that unit. Well, if we, I don't know, Tam, if we can go back to that picture, is that possible? Sorry to put you on. We have a lot of button pushing here. The other picture, actually, the bit on the front, I'm intrigued with that middle part of it, the main tuning bit of it. What did you say that was from?
It's a mill and drive. You can buy it from the States. Well, you could do. I mean, I don't know whether they're available now, but it's a slow motion drive with a handle on it. You can't really see it because that sub piece of aluminium I put on there in black covered a hole that I'd made for something else.
Right.
And decided not to use it, and I decided to try and get a mill and drive, because a mill and drive is what they used to use in the US on transmitters, and I fancied one of those because there's a slow motion drive for the inductor, and to go from one end to the other, it's a winding job, you see, so it takes you a finite time to get from one end to the other. But you can certainly match balance line like the 600 ohm feeder on my rhombic, or an end-fed ZEP, or a doublet, or anything like that, with an ATU like that, dead easily. It's a 3-variable ATU, and it's an easy thing to tune.
Yes.
Turns counter too, isn't it?
It's a turns counter, essentially. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, it's really good. Roger, thank you very much for sharing your experience tonight, and for that wonderful thing that you built then. I think you're right. It does look like the sort of thing that we could build. Maybe we'll some of you could have a look, help me and look around and maybe find a nice little project that we could almost make a simple, very simple, low cost.
It's getting the components nowadays. I don't think you'd source very much for an SPC transmatch these days without spending a bit of money.
No, I mean the capacitors, I know that they were getting very expensive. The last time I saw things like Jackson capacitors, the old vein type. Jackson were probably the most famous name, and I know that at rallies you could easily be paying 20 or 30 quid nowadays for that sort of thing.
Johnson were the ones we used to use.
Johnson. Maybe it was Johnson. Sorry, it maybe was Johnson. Yeah, Johnson. I thought it was Jackson Brothers, but it doesn't matter. Thank you very much. We've got a few little comments now because we've 9:30. I know that's quite late for some people. I think a few people are sort of tuning out. So we'll probably start to wrap things up now. But thanks, Roger. Thanks to all of you. So some of these questions and comments I'm going to read, and maybe we can have a look at everybody at home. And if anybody would like to reply or respond to any of them. Tom Miller has said, MFJ has very good diagrams of their ATUs. I have some projects on the go. Started in 2019. Goodness knows if I'll ever get them finished. All part of the hobby, he says. Absolutely. So he's making some stuff. James M0JGX says, I have various ATUs, including the built-in type and an automatic LDG, but I still love my Decca Easy Match. And he also says, most TV and satellite cable is now CCA copper-coated aluminium. Yes, do watch for that. I don't know if, hopefully most of you know at home, but if you particularly want copper cable, and most of us do, copper is very expensive now. And so copper-coated aluminium or copper-covered aluminium, if you see the word CCA next to a piece of cable, whether it's mains cable, signal cable, coax or whatever, be wary, because it's not going to be pure copper. It's not going to be solid copper, rather. It's going to be aluminium coated or plated in copper. It's a lot cheaper to make, but it's not as good. I remember, as a quick aside, this is quite a few years ago now, sitting inside Mac, adding something to it with Kevin helping me, and we were making, I think, a video cable feed to put on the monitors that are in the side of Mac, if you've seen it, and we were trying to solder up a plug to a cable, and I just couldn't get this solder to work, and I just couldn't understand why I couldn't, and I kept cutting it off and stripping some more back and everything, and it turned out it was the early days of aluminium cable coming in, but there's a lot of it now. When I was buying in the cable for the filters a few weeks ago, I had to be very careful, because a lot of the mains cable, because that is very expensive, were coming in, and I had to watch for those magic words CCA. I even wrote to the company that made that mains cable for Screwfix, which is a British, at least, importer, and actually asked for them in writing that this was solid copper and not all copper. Anyway, Colin G0ODR says, just a point that in the training nowadays we use the phrase AMU, antenna matching unit. Quite, Colin, absolutely agree. I did mention that right at the beginning, and that's how it was drummed into me as well. antenna matching because it's more accurately describing, not antenna tuning, as if that somehow magically tunes the antenna. He also says, I built an ATU when I started, ARRL design. I used a slow motion drive and a counter out of an old tape player driven by an elastic band around the drive shaft. Isn't that wonderful? So anyway, I think we've just about wrapped things up. I think we've got Steve with his hand up, so let's go to Steve G3EVA. If you can unmute, Steve, sorry.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I was looking through to find some stuff that I use for tuning. I found this in my box. I was wondering if anybody knows exactly what it is, because I don't have the instructions for it.
It's an HF antenna analyzer. 1, 2, is that 60 megs?
Yes, that's right.
What's the make at the bottom, Steve? Those 4 little circles. Is that the brand?
No, that's just some plastic screws. Where are we?
Oh, okay. A little bit up.
They're plastic screws. Just lift up,
Okay.
up a bit. There we go. Yeah, they're little nylon screws is what they are.
No, well, I've not seen that. Anybody at home seen any one of those before?
That's the bottom of it. There's a power supply and a USB, and on the other end there's the RF connector.
So having USB makes it relatively recent, doesn't it? Probably the last 10 years anyway.
Yeah, but I don't know where the instructions are for it, so I didn't wonder if anybody knew what it was.
I think from memory it was a Chinese copy of a analyzer. I'll have to do some digging, but I know I've seen it all, and they were available on eBay in China, about £40, I think. But yeah, I used to have one, got rid of it because it weren't really that good, to be honest.
Right, good. I've got a couple of VNAs, nano VNAs now that I use, but and also I've got a thing that I got when I bought my mag loop. It came with a really nice SWR analyzer, which runs into your laptop or computer, and it gives you a graph which it's a bit like the Nano VNA, except it's a little bit better really for just for SWR. The screen you get is much more accurate. I got one, and Paul G4 ZBA got one at the same time. We found them very good for matching and tuning the mag loops. Back to you, David.
Good, thank you, Steve. Yeah. Okay, well, as I said, I think we're going to wrap it there.
In fact, I've just typed in on Google Chinese antenna analyzer, and on eBay HF antenna analyzer 1 to 60 megahertz, £91, and it comes up, exactly the same one.
The same looking thing.
MR300, I think it is.
Right.
So that's the one. One thing I will note on rigs that have got built-in ATUs or amplifiers that have got built-in ATUs, make sure you've got a decent RF ground on them, because that would make a difference to the reading that's produced. That could be another reason why Julian may have an issue with his radio, because if there's RF getting into the radio from the ATU, and that will cause the thing to sort of mismatch and jump around a bit. So a good RF ground is needed on the radio as well, because you get a different reading with it grounded or ungrounded.
Yeah. Thank you, Andy. That's really good advice. Yeah, grounding. We haven't even mentioned grounding tonight, and that's important with all antenna systems anyway. But as you say, really important as well for the if you're using an ATU. Okay, I think we've really covered lots of things. I've been using Malcolm's list, actually, which he sent me as a sort of basis to make sure we covered everything. And we really do. I think we have, Malcolm. I think if you'd agree. Because, you know, there were various things. You put various models of ATUs, remote ATUs at the base of the antenna and that sort of thing. And I think we've covered most aspects. So that was a good list to have.
I think we have, as you said.
And I think, and hopefully it's been good for all of us, whether you're experienced or whether you're a beginner in this hobby. Hopefully you've learned that there's an awful lot to that tiny little subject that sounds ATUs and antenna matching. So anyway, if any of you like any last comments at home, Alan?
Yeah, just a quickie. Don't forget the club has a very easy to use antenna analyzer that any of the members can borrow. Very, very easy to use. I've used it once myself. So any new operator or any operator can borrow that from the club. I think I can't remember who's got access to it now.
Well,
back to you, David.
No, that's a very good point. The club actually has, I believe, 3. It's a long time since we lent them out because I think they're in our store, at least some of them at the school at the moment. But we do have an MFJ, I believe, 259, which is the one, and a 269. I had a 269, was my first one. Which did everything from HF to UHF. And that's an MFJ with a basic meter, and we also in recent years bought an electronic one with a screen from Martin Lynch. I cannot remember the brand. Anyway, if you're a member of Norfolk Amateur Radio Club, you do need to be a member. You can have a look at the assets list of our loan items, and you can ask to borrow them. The only thing I would say is I'll have to check. Tammy and I went and retrieved quite a lot of the club's equipment in the earliest days of the pandemic, when we could get access to the school and our store, but we haven't been back since. So I'm not sure if that was amongst the equipment.
I think Sonny's got one.
Yeah, he may well do. He may well have. So we grabbed a lot of the equipment, the rigs and the power supplies and the laptops and things like that. But we couldn't take everything. There was an awful lot, as you can imagine. Anyway, yes, great point though, Alan, because it's the sort of thing that if you don't need to use something very often like that, you may not want to spend several £100s on it. So it's a good point. That's what also another useful job for the club. I think Julian put his hand up as well, just for a final. Julian?
Yeah, I did borrow. I had borrowed one at the club once some years ago. Can you pass on to Sonny that I'm still waiting for an answer? I know he's busy this next couple of weeks or whatever, but I have not had an answer from him yet.
Okay, well he is particularly busy. I don't know if you know why, but he got married last Thursday. So I think
okay.
Maybe you didn't know that. No, looking at your face, you didn't. So he is away, and I think he's deserved that break from it. But I'll drop a little note to him and just say he does a lot for a lot of people in the club, though. So I think if you can just be a little bit patient at the moment, because he's had an awful lot on planning that wedding, and we'll bring you some pictures and things like that when he gets back. We don't want to just use ones we've seen on social media. We'd like him to give us the pictures, and I'm sure we'd love to share that with you. But yes, for those of you who don't know, Sonny 2E0SYW did get M0. Did I say that? 2E0. It's been one of those days. Did get married last Thursday, but we'll bring you pictures of that when he gets back. So it'll be nice to bring you pictures that he wants to share with everybody. But I think that's everything. If anything else from anybody at home now, Bob?
One more. Yeah, one more. Steve, G3EVA. If you do a search on MR300, digital shortwave antenna analyzer, manual, I've just found it, and it brings it up and it will tell you exactly how to use it.
Lovely. Thank you very much for that.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
That's what friends are for. Thank you.
Exactly what friends are for and what clubs are for and everything. And this has been a great example, I think, as I said, when I I'm trying to think of all the different elements of making a shack up, and antenna tuning and antenna matching, because we started with antennas with Steve, of course, the original one. It just didn't seem a very interesting subject, but look at that, over 2 hours later we're doing things. So yes, we've got some pictures.
Yeah,
Tammy, thank you for reminding that.
LGAJ was on here earlier, but he's not now because he was driving, but he did send us a couple of pictures.
Good point.
So we'll just quickly show
Thank you for that. Yes, I must do that. Thanks for doing this. So firstly, this one, which apparently you found. That's an automatic antenna tuner, presumably responsibly sourced, Tammy?
Presumably.
Bubba's automatic antenna tuner. He found that on the web, 1.6 to 30 megs. Big dummy manufacturing, it says there, and it says on the bottom right, connectors and instructions on the rear label, no warranty. But he did send us a couple of serious pictures as well. He said this: auto ATUs are controlled by microprocessors switching combinations of inductors and capacitors to perform a match. The RF is sensed by a detector circuit, and this signal is then converted to logic levels that the CPU, which is the microprocessor, can read. Matching can take up to 5 seconds, but once matched, this is normally stored and a retune is quicker. This is normally done at a lower power so as not to damage the transmit output stage. And older ATUs used a variable capacitor inductors controlled by stepper motors to vary both L and C. And auto ATUs have limits on the ability to tune a mismatched antenna. The larger picture which I think might be this one, is an SGC SG230 and has over 170 non-volatile memory locations and will tune a wire from 8 feet to 23 feet. Better to have a resonant antenna though to start with, but it does help in a limited environment. So that's
the other
Mark
picture
sent
that
us.
Mark sent
Oh yes,
as
there's the
well.
IT100. That's the little LDG one that is, I think, meant for ICOM. It's sort of tailored to plug straight into an ICOM. But there are a lot out there, but as everybody's said, they're the automatic ones with lots of electronics in them, but you could start by maybe making your own. So if anybody watching this has got a good projects they can point to in one of the magazines or online or ARRL or Radcom or Practical Wireless, then let us know and we'll share it with everybody. But I think that we do have to call it there because it is quite late. It's 10:15, which has been a really good evening here on NARC Live. Just to remind you what's happening at the club again in the next few days. We've got on Sunday the GB2 RS News on Sunday the 16th. Sunday the 23rd on GB3 NB at 7 o'clock. On Monday we've got the Monday Night Net at 7:30 with Michael 2E0 SZP. At 8:30 we've got the 80 meter CW net on 3.543 megahertz. And next Wednesday, hopefully, we'll have Kevin N4XL with ferrites and balance talk. And the week after we'd like to run another one of these sessions with your results and your feedback on the filter kits that you've made. But if Kevin can't do that next week because he's experiencing bad weather in the States and had no power when we communicated a few days ago, then it will be swapped over. So anyway, the basics is if you've made one of those filters or you've got anything to say about mains filters, then please dig out some pictures, send them to us, or come on to us live because that will be an interactive like this and you can share them with us and let's find out how good those filters have been and how they've helped you. I know Alan had made his within hours of picking it up just before Christmas. So, and I'm sure lots of you have also built them as well. But before my voice goes, I think that has to be it for today's NARC Live. It's lovely to see you. Thanks for joining us. And so for now, from Tammy M0TC.
Goodbye.
And from me, David G7ERP. Take care of yourselves. And we'll see you again next week. Just to look at everybody at home, waving goodbye as well. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again next week at 7:30 for NARC Live on Wednesday. Bye-bye.